These days it seems like there are new filmmaking lights coming out everywhere I look. They're getting crazy powerful to the point where they're almost rivaling traditional lights when it comes to output, and the prices are coming down to the point where we can almost call them affordable. But of all the new lights I've gotten my hands on this year, the most interesting of them all isn't the biggest or the cheapest or the highest output. It's actually a tiny little light that I didn't even know I wanted, but now that I have it, I'm finding all sorts of creative uses for it. And that's this little guy, the Molis X100 from Zhiyun. And in this video, I'm gonna run through some of the reasons why I think this is one of the most useful lights a documentary filmmaker can have in their kit, what specifically I love about it, and a few areas where it could be improved. I'm also gonna bring you along for a filmmaking road trip that I took a couple of weeks ago to show you a few BTS examples from the field so you can see exactly how I'm using this light for things that no other light could do in my kit. Hey guys, welcome back, and if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, and on this channel, I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working as a documentary filmmaker and photographer. So I've always thought of Zhiyun as the company that makes gimbals, specifically the Crane series, which is a slightly lower budget alternative to DJI's Ronin series. But since I rarely use gimbals in my documentary work, I'd never actually used anything that they'd made in the past. So when they reached out to me about the possibility of testing the Molis X100, I was a little surprised. I guess I shouldn't really be surprised though, because it does seem like every company out there is getting into the LED lighting game, but if I'm being totally honest, I was pretty skeptical at first. I'm not a gear reviewer, and I'm not even a full-time YouTuber for that matter. My real job is still working as a documentary cinematographer. But since starting this channel, I get dozens of emails a week from manufacturers asking me to feature their stuff, and for the most part, I say no. I don't just want gear for the sake of having gear, and if I can't see a way to incorporate it into my professional workflow and actually use the thing, then I'm not interested. So I let the email sit in my inbox for a few days while I thought of a nice way to say thanks but no thanks. But right before I did, I watched a few YouTube videos to make totally sure I was making the right decision. In the end, it was a video from Andiax that changed my mind, which, if you've never heard of them, is a really cool YouTube channel run by a small production company in Norway. And in that video, I saw him using the X100 in a bunch of really cool setups that wouldn't be possible with most filmmaking lights, including doing things like mounting them to trees. So I realized that maybe this was actually something that would work for me as a doc shooter. So I accepted their offer, and let me just say that I'm very glad I did. So what is this thing? Well, this tiny package, which is about the size of a small paperback novel, is a 100-watt bicolor light that comes with a dedicated battery and arguably the most adorable softbox that's ever existed in the history of filmmaking. It's the big brother of the even smaller 60-watt light that was all over YouTube a few months ago, and in my opinion, it's probably the most interesting filmmaking light to come out this year. And before I dive into the specifics of why I like this light so much and get into the BTS lighting setups, I just want to drop some really exciting news, and that's that my professional documentary cinematography course that I've been talking about for so long is finally done, and I'm going to open it up officially on August 7th. I put a ton of work into getting everything I've learned about how to shoot at a high level and build an actual career as a documentary cinematographer into this course, which is why it took so long. But in my very biased opinion, I think the wait is going to be worth it. For any of you who signed up to the email waitlist, thanks for your patience. I'm going to be sending out an early bird discount code next week that's going to be valid for the 7 days leading up to launch, so keep an eye out for it. And for any of you watching who aren't on that list, you might want to jump on it now so you can take advantage of that discounted week, because once the course goes live on the 7th, the code isn't going to work anymore. There's a link in the description as per usual, and sorry for the plug, but I'm super excited to put this thing out in the world, and I wanted to let you all know what's up. But getting back to the video, why do I like this light so much? Well, firstly is the shockingly high output for a light this small. Compared to a similar output light from other manufacturers like the 120D from SmallRig or Aperture, this thing is probably around a quarter the size or maybe even less. I'm not exaggerating when I say I could fit 5 of these things into the same size carrying case I use for my 120D, including all the power units, batteries, and accessories. That opens up some really interesting possibilities for remote filmmaking work, because when weight and space is an issue like it is so often for me, one of the first things I have to leave behind are lights. But what makes this light even more useful for situations like this is the fact that it comes with its own rechargeable battery that attaches to the side for those times when you're away from power outlets. Now, powering lights from batteries is nothing new, but typically you'd have to use V-mounts or something with a D-tap cable for something like this, and that means bringing extra cables, using up the battery power that you might need for your camera, and also figuring out how you're going to rig a big heavy battery in the same place that you want to put the light. Like, it's all well and good to be able to clamp a light to a ceiling beam or a branch or something, but getting a 1.5 pound battery to stay in the same position makes things a lot more complicated. By having the battery built into the light itself, you don't have to worry about any of this. There's no cables and no extra rigging to deal with, and that's seriously cool in my opinion. So let's get out of the studio for a second and look at one lighting setup I tried with the Mollis X100 in a remote cabin on the east coast of Canada where we needed light but had no access to electricity. We're here right now in a powerless tiny home that a friend of mine was nice enough to lend us. We're trying to get some shots here of Santiago working at his computer. We're filming a segment on media management for the upcoming cinematography course, and we happen to be staying in my friend's tiny home, which has no power and is very small. And it's really great that we have this place, but it's super dark, and this shot, you know, this looks cool from a moody point of view, but not all productions are supposed to be really dark, so we need to get more light in here if we're gonna film, and that's a perfect use for that Xeon light. We have very little overhead space, just a little loft above us. We don't wanna be setting up stands or we're gonna have no room to film, so a tiny battery-powered light that I can clamp onto this loft is exactly what I would need a light like this for. So that's already a pretty massive difference. I can use the app now that it's up there. I can use the app to dial this in. If you want a really stylized look, you could maybe point it straight down at his head and get something a little more dramatic. I want something a little bit cleaner here because this is about showing a process, not creating some sort of really dark, depressing mood. So I'm just shining it into the wall, creating a bit more of a softbox on his face. And already it's working pretty well. I might cool it down just a little bit, experiment with a little bit of different brightnesses. Something right around there looks totally workable, and we have no stands, no wires. Pretty great for situations like this. Now, I don't know how often you're shooting in places without power and when you need to fit tiny lights into really small places. It's actually pretty common for me. There aren't honestly very many other things out there on the market that could do that role. You can run things off of V-mounts, you can run things off of external batteries. Most of them require stands, so to have something that small and that light that's running on its own battery that I can then control with my phone and hide in all sorts of weird little cracks is really handy. I'm definitely going to put this thing to use. Now, that kind of thing might have been possible with other lights with the similar output, but based on what I've got in my kit, it definitely wouldn't have been as easy. And I also know that there are lots of options out there with built-in batteries like Pavo tubes and such, but for me, this system is better for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because you can carry more than one of them with you and change it on the fly. Built-in batteries are great, but once it's dead, if you don't have access to power to recharge it, that's the end of your shooting. And secondly, batteries degrade over time, and so having one that you can change is going to give this light a much longer lifespan than with something integrated. I didn't do any formal tests here, but the spec sheet says it'll run at full power for half an hour, which is admittedly not all that long, but the thing is that at full power, the light is insanely bright, and most of the time I was using it, I actually had it set to its minimum brightness where we had it running for well over an hour and it still didn't die. In fact, it's so bright that in some situations, it's actually a problem. And that's one of the very few issues I had with it. It's almost too much power for some situations, and you might have to get this light a little further away than you want to stop it from blowing out your subjects in the dark. But that's not at all the problem I expected to have with a light this small, and I guess that's why they also make the 60-watt version, so it's a pretty spoiled complaint to make, really. What's really crazy, considering how strong this thing is that it's also bicolor. I might not have been surprised if this light was daylight balanced only, but to keep up this kind of output all the way from 2700 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin is wild. So let's take a look at another setup and see what sorts of results I was able to get while shooting a nighttime campfire scene. Could you tell that this is actually a fake shot? We're out here camping and stranded, so I'm not actually sitting in front of the fire. And Santiago isn't sitting here. I'm just in a little dip in the woods with a couple of lights. So this is the finished shot. It's super simple. It's this little tiny MC light on a faint fire effect to give some texture, and then the Zion X100 just up there. It is insane how strong that light is. It's actually like really exciting. This might seem like a gimmick, but I do this a couple times a year. I work on some survival shows. I've worked on shows in the outdoor setting a lot, and I've shows in Kenya. It's amazing how many times in documentaries you might get someone sitting around a fire. So I actually do this setup, and it's working amazingly with this light. It's actually so strong. It's only at 1% right now. It's just sitting back there 8 meters into the forest at 1%, and it's faking this light. So the fact that I can carry that in with a tiny little battery and have it run for, I don't know, it seems it's been running for about 45 minutes now. Don't know what the total runtime is. And obviously in documentary, I would never say, fake a fire and pretend like your characters are at a fire that doesn't exist. What I'm talking about is when people are sitting around a real fire, you can just use these extra lights to augment it so that you can actually shoot it. So, if you pixel peep, you can probably tell that shot's lit. This is not a Roger Deakins cinematic masterpiece. But if you augment what's already there, and just add in little pops of light, you can get amazing results on camera. So yeah, something to keep in mind for your setups. Don't fake it, that's not the point. Just augment and make it more cinematic. All right, I don't know what you guys thought of that, but I thought it looked pretty good actually. And augmenting or even faking firelight is actually a fairly common scenario for me, and something I do at least a few times a year on shoots. The light worked amazingly well for both of these setups, and apart from sometimes needing to tone it down with extra diffusion because it's just so powerful, the only other minor thing that bothered me was the way you physically turn this thing on, because instead of just holding the power button like a normal light, you have to hold the power button, wait a few seconds, and then turn the intensity dial, and then only then does it turn on. And if you don't hold it for long enough, then it'll power itself off, and it's just, there you go, just a little finicky. Now I'm sure they designed it like this so that it wouldn't accidentally turn on in your bag or pocket, but it does take a bit of getting used to, and it takes longer to turn this guy on than any other light I own, which is kind of weird. This is not really a big deal. I mean, we're talking about seconds here, but if I could ask Jian to change anything, it would be this. By now I think you get the point, and hopefully you're starting to see why the X100 is my new favorite light of the year. I liked it so much that I'm seriously considering adding the smaller 60-watt version to my kit when this one is too much output, as well as the even bigger 200-watt version that's going to come out sometime later this year. At a time when lighting manufacturers seem to be most interested in competing for who can make the biggest light out there, it's refreshing to see a new company enter the lighting game and create a product with some outside-the-box thinking. This is a light I had no idea I even wanted or needed until I got my hands on it, but after spending a week with it, all I can say is that it's going to be a permanent part of my lighting kit, and considering how small it is, there's really just no reason not to bring it. So if you're shooting documentaries or working in remote environments, or if you just like to travel with a minimalist kit, in my opinion, this is the most interesting light of the year. And if you're interested in cinematography, or if you want to level up your documentary cinematography skills, check out the link in the description and jump on the early bird waiting list to get a discount code for the professional documentary cinematography course, where there's an entire unit dedicated to gear and another one dedicated to lighting and how to do it well. See ya. You good?
Yeah, the only problem is looking to camera. Can you just turn it to the side without looking like a dork?
Do I look insane?
You have to look like a dork, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Always say that.
Just a very slight turn to do it.